Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
More young people are buying into those perverted sexual preferences and gender fluidity.
Calls for a controversial Conservative candidate to be removed from the party. Also,
school needs to be a safe place for all kids. It needs to be a place where they can be physically safe, but also safe to express their opinions.
Hong Kong-China tensions spill over at a Burnaby High School. And
these spills are occurring as the result of plastic manufacturing that goes on the island.
Sounding the alarm over plastic in our waterways.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. There are calls tonight for a local Conservative candidate to pull out of the federal election race. Opponents of Burnaby North Seymour candidate Heather Leung say recent opinions expressed by her are homophobic, transphobic, and hateful. Leung has been pretty much invisible during the campaign, but as the CBC's Rafferty Baker reports tonight, the Conservatives' on-camera comments have put her in the thick of a major controversy.
Heather Leung has run a very private campaign, avoiding media interviews and skipping candidate debates. But her views on social issues have been thoroughly documented by the local newspaper Burnaby Now, and in a recent Vancouver Sun column, which includes a video in which Leung expresses support for pseudoscientific conversion therapy.
More young people are buying into those perverted sexual preferences and gender fluidity.
Now, her opponents are calling for her to be kicked out of her party.
Andrew Scheer, as the leader of the party, has got to say that Heather Leung doesn't represent the Conservative Party of Canada. Her name may be on the ballot, but the people of this community, of Burnaby North Seymour, reject this kind of hatred and offensive language.
Green candidate Anita is calling for Leung to step aside. Incumbent Terry Beach stopped short of calling for her dismissal from the Conservative Party. He issued a statement saying, "It is unacceptable for anyone who seeks public office to reject the humanity and dignity of their LGBTQ2+ constituents." Beach says his community demands to know why Andrew Scheer continues to support Leung. Scheer was asked today in Toronto whether he would continue to stand by Leung as a candidate.
I haven't seen this particular video that you're referencing. Of course, our party stands for inclusiveness and the rights of all Canadians, including LGBT Canadians, and will always do so.
For Robinson, who made history as the first openly gay MP in Canada, there's no place for Leung's views on the campaign trail.
So what's the impact on young people in this community? What this Conservative candidate is telling them is that they're perverted. And she's saying that they can be drawn out of their homosexuality. She's telling their parents to try to convert them. This leads young people to suicide and to attempted suicide, and it's devastating.
Heather Leung's campaign has declined multiple interview requests from CBC News this week. Today, her campaign office is dark, the lights are out. Her manager says he's busy putting up more signs in the neighborhood while she spends the day discussing the issue with the national office. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Burnaby.
And breaking news on this story, CBC News has just confirmed that Heather Leung has been dropped by the Conservative Party. She is out of this federal election. A statement from the Conservative Party tonight says Heather Leung is no longer representing the Conservative Party of Canada in the riding of Burnaby North Seymour. Recent media reports have brought to light offensive comments made by Ms. Leung, saying homosexuals recruit children and describing the sexual orientation of the LGBTQ community as perverted. There's no tolerance in the Conservative Party for those types of offensive comments. This is a statement tonight from the Conservative Party of Canada saying that Heather Leung is no longer representing the Conservatives in the riding of Burnaby North Seymour. And we'll have more on this later in this newscast. Well, to more breaking political news, this time in BC politics, a provincial cabinet minister has just resigned amid a police investigation. CBC Vancouver News at 11 host Dan Burritt joins us now live with more. So Dan, who's stepped down?
Mike, it is Ginny Sims, the Minister for Citizen Services and the MLA for Surrey Panorama. The news came down in the last hour. In a statement, Premier John Horgan says this afternoon the Attorney General David Eby told him a special prosecutor has been appointed for an RCMP investigation related to Sims. Sims has now resigned from cabinet. We don't know what the RCMP investigation is about or why a special prosecutor has been appointed. The Force is saying very little tonight, only that it will be working with that special prosecutor closely. We're waiting to hear from opposition leader Andrew Wilkinson, who will be commenting shortly, as well as Green MLAs.
Okay, Dan, so what is Ginny Sims saying about all this?
Well, very little. She's not doing any interviews, but she says she does expect to be exonerated. Take a look at this statement. She says, I have not been given details of any allegations, but there was no credibility to previous allegations. I am confident that my name will be cleared, but do not want to distract from the important work of government in the meantime. So to recap, Ginny Sims, BC's Minister for Citizen Services, has resigned from cabinet today. The RCMP has launched an investigation into her, and a special prosecutor has been appointed. Again, it's not yet clear why police are investigating Sims, and we'll have any updates later on. Mike?
Dan Burrett, live in the newsroom tonight. Thanks. Well, as pro-democracy protests continue in Hong Kong, the region's leader has invoked an emergency ordinance to ban wearing face masks at public rallies. The move was immediately met with harsh condemnation by the protesters.
I don't see how you could relate this to a step closer to authoritarianism. This is a responsible act to deal with an extremely difficult situation.
I strongly urge the international community to aware on the de facto martial law might apply in Hong Kong soon.
The protests have been going on in Hong Kong for nearly 4 months now. The anti-mask regulation came into effect Friday night at midnight local time. Before the deadline, protesters rallied again, with some vandalizing a metro station. Police quickly moved in. The chief executive has not ruled out further measures, including curfews, media censorship, and control of harbors, ports, and transport. Violations of the mask ban are punishable by fines and up to a year in prison. Canada has had a similar law in place since 2013. Meanwhile, here in BC, tensions between pro-Hong Kong supporters and pro-China backers are spilling over into high schools.
Oh my God. We're going to the office. Okay.
This video captured one student shoving another student during an argument at Burnaby North Secondary. It happened after the student who was shoved put up a Free Hong Kong poster on their locker. Some other students tried to tear it down, and that's when things got heated.
What you see and hear on the video is a lot of them wanting it to stop, and actually at one point encouraging them to come down to the office and have a conversation with us about how to navigate it. And so fortunately that's what seemed to shut down the tensions a little bit and enable us to move forward the next morning. School needs to be a safe place for all kids. It needs to be a place where they can be physically safe, but also safe to express their opinions, and that we as a school and school community can help them work through that and navigate it.
And he says school staff have spoken to the 4 students involved, as well as their parents. He would not say if any of the students were disciplined. As Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou's court proceedings close for the time being, it is RCMP investigators who find themselves in hot water after a last-minute bombshell accusation about what they did with data stripped from her phone at YVR. Our Jason Proctor was in court all week. So, Jason, what are the RCMP accused of doing here?
Well, Mike, this has to do with data, technical data from her phone. So, for instance, the serial number, the SIM card numbers, that kind of information that the defense, Meng Wanzhou's defense, claims the RCMP sent to the FBI. If they did that, the defense says that would be a violation of the Extradition Act, and they say that would be something that would be worth tossing this entire case. This kind of goes to this bigger theory that they're trying to prove here, which was that this whole kind of affair around the time of her arrest was a conspiracy between the CBSA, the RCMP, and the FBI to conduct a covert criminal investigation against Meng Wanzhou. This was technical information, but the defense says that it was incredibly valuable because using sort of the FBI's, tools, they can extract, a lot of information about text calls, that kind of thing in regards to this information in regards to her devices to build an investigation against her. The Crown, I should say, says this didn't happen, and now they have to sort of go about showing that, as they say, none of this information was ever passed on.
All right, so what happens next in this case?
Well, we're now in a position where this was actually supposed to be kind of an ordinary hearing in the lead up to her actual extradition hearing, which starts in January. But basically what's happened is that the Crown has been told to, go away, get some information from the RCMP investigators involved with this, affidavits to say that they didn't send this information over. That's going to come back. The defense will look back. There may be some cross-examination that goes on. The bottom line is that there's a delay here now in terms of this process, which is all about kind of an abuse of process allegation that she's going to ultimately try to make in her bid to have the whole affair thrown out. The next thing, though, that we can really look forward to in this is the extradition hearing itself, which, as I say, starts in January 2020.
All right, Jason, thanks very much for this. Jason Proctor reporting for us tonight. An environmental group is exposing what it claims is an industrial spill of small pieces of plastic into the Fraser River. Hundreds of thousands of tiny plastic pellets floating down the Fraser, washing ashore as far away as Vancouver Island. As Joel Ballard reports, the group is demanding action by both the industry and government.
Just look at this. Tons of pellets here all over the ground.
It's plastic in its primary form.
If you start picking through the grass here, you see pellets everywhere.
Before being molded into other shapes like bags and water bottles.
These spills are occurring as the result of plastic manufacturing that goes on the island, and they're going through the storm drain system and into our waters in BC.
Over 3 years of research, Boudinot's group Surfrider Foundation claims it has found hundreds of thousands of pellets in high concentrations along the Fraser and further.
All around Vancouver Island, the Gulf Islands, San Juan Islands, Sunshine Coast, North Vancouver Island, like you name it, they're out there.
It's bad because the ocean basically are drowning in microplastic today.
Juan Jose Alava is an ocean pollution researcher at UBC. He says fish and birds often eat these plastics, which absorb the toxins around them. Those plastics then travel up the food chain.
A plastic bottle that is made of this kind of primary microplastic, they can last for more than 450 years. So they are going to be there for many, many generations.
Back on Anasis Island, Boudinot is still at work.
It's insane.
He says industry should be required to install storm drain covers, which are already in use on construction sites, to catch the pellets. CBC News reached out to a number of plastic producers along the Fraser River who either declined or didn't respond to an on-camera interview. But Boudinot says this goes higher than simply the manufacturer.
And we're calling on the Ministry of Environment and the province of BC to investigate these spills and monitor them and make sure they don't happen in the first place.
In a statement, the ministry said discharge of pollution to the environment is prohibited under the Environmental Management Act, and that it will be looking into these concerns and determining appropriate next steps. In all, Boudinot says there's a simple solution to this type of pollution.
When a spill happens, we clean it up.
Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
Hundreds of pink salmon are dead in Squamish after BC Hydro disrupted the flow of a local river, trapping the fish in isolated pools where they died. Scientists estimate about 300 fish died because of lowering water levels on the Squamish River. BC Hydro says its facility changed the river's flow for public safety reasons, staff believing they did so gradually enough to give the fish time to escape. But a biologist who found the dead salmon said it is spawning season and BC Hydro should have waited. The power company says it's investigating ways to avoid similar impacts in the future. Now, hikers and bike riders are being asked to stay off the west side of Mount Seymour. The request coming a week after a black bear chased 3 cyclists down a trail. One of the cyclists captured the anxious encounter on his GoPro. The bear eventually retreated and the men emerged unscathed. Wildlife groups are reminding people black bears are most active at this time of year as they search for food to bulk up for winter hibernation. The North Shore Mountain Bike Association says the animal is likely protecting its territory. Brett is here, the weekend is here, and is that a lot of green I see in behind you there?
Yeah, that would be indicating the cooler temperatures that we've seen today, but this weekend there's really going to be something in it for just about anyone. If you like the cooler, cozier conditions, well, you're going to have that. If you want a bit of sun, well, you're going to have that too. But right now, outside our studios and in general across the region, we're looking at temperatures around 11 or 12 degrees, and in fact, Vancouver only got up to 12 degrees, so it was definitely on the cooler side, and that was thanks to this rain that was coming through in a few waves. We had a few showers first thing this morning, and then it sort of tapered off, and now we're just seeing a few spotty showers into the Fraser Valley, and that is largely going to be the trend as we go throughout the evening hours and into the overnight period. But yes, of course, the weekend is here, and you're probably wondering how it's all going to play out. Throughout the overnight period tonight, I'd expect just a few isolated showers. Nothing too crazy. We're looking at lows going down to about 9 degrees or so. By the time that we get to Saturday, this is where things are going to start to change. The morning is going to probably start off with a few showers, so if you're looking for an excuse to sleep in, that might be one of them. By the afternoon, though, we're looking at the sun coming back. We're going to see more sun than cloud at that point, and the day is going to be exactly at seasonal, around 15 degrees. Nice and clear for the overnight. Then come Sunday, it is going to be a mostly cloudy day by contrast, and then late evening, we'd say probably around 6, 7, maybe even 8 o'clock, we're going to get a new wave of rain, and that's really going to be with the way that we start off the upcoming work week.
Okay, Brett, thanks. Talk to you again in a bit.
Sounds good.
Working on a construction site is a physical job, whether it's dealing with the uneven ground or climbing ladders and scaffolding. Now, imagine doing it with cerebral palsy. Our Joel Ballard has this profile of a woman who's had to adapt to succeed in her industry.
When Julia Halipchuk walks onto a construction site, it's clear she's one of the people in charge. But that wasn't always the case.
When applying for jobs, I tended to look for more office-based work than something that was site-based.
Halipchuk is a structural engineer. She also has cerebral palsy, a breakdown in the neural pathways that can affect speech and movement.
For me, it has affected my right side, so I don't have proper use of my hand, and my foot is affected as well, so I walk with a little bit of a limp.
Because of her condition, she wasn't sure she could fulfill all the responsibilities of an on-site engineer.
Probably was rooted in a little bit of fear or cautiousness to make sure I'm not putting myself out for rejection.
Yet despite that fear, she kept getting hired for jobs that required her to be on site. Now half of Halipchuk's time is spent designing in the office, the other half on site, which she says presents a number of challenges. Her greatest foe?
Climbing like a vertical ladder, because I don't do it proper three-point contact.
So she's had to adapt, whether that's physically.
You may see that my arm doesn't work the same way that like an able-bodied person's arm does. But when climbing a ladder, I use it to hook into a ladder rung, or I'll use it as a brace when I'm climbing up something that's a little rickety. It's not really any different than anyone else, it's just the way it's used, it looks different.
Or by switching up her duties with a colleague. That was an important lesson for Halipchuk, identifying both her limitations and capabilities, as well as how to effectively communicate them to her employers.
It's actually been quite easy to adapt to it, because it's the things that Julia has requested are actually no different than any other person that may be of a smaller stature or afraid of heights.
And Gil agrees. It's all about recognizing your needs and restrictions.
If you have that open conversation with someone, there's a very high chance that they will accommodate that, or something that you have in your mind might not actually be a big deal.
Halipchuk knows it can be difficult deciding what career to pursue when you have a disability, but she has some well-earned advice.
Stick to an industry or an interest or a hobby or some aspect of life that you find interesting, and then you will find people and companies and jobs that will make place for you in their workforce.
Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
And just a reminder, you can watch this newscast and other CBC programs wherever you go by downloading the CBC Gem app. It's free. And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Well, it's been an election campaign dogged by scandals on all sides. Coming up, we break down the drama so far. Football players at a Canadian university are blazing an innovative trail when it comes to stopping concussions in sports. Dalhousie University is trying out highly specialized smart helmets that help track the true impact of a hit to the head. CBC's Kayla Hounsell explains.
As they kick off their home opener, the Dalhousie Tigers say they have something no other university football team in the country has.
Will.
You just saw something with that player.
Yeah, so he's not checked in. You need to check in your helmet there, brother.
They're all wearing helmets embedded with sensors that transmit signals to this device when players take hits to the head. The technology tracks the hits and warns coaches when players reach a certain threshold.
We can get them off the field, hopefully, before they sustain a bad head impact and get them looked at prior to that.
I feel a lot safer on the field knowing that there's somebody on the sideline basically having my brain in their hands.
That person is Casey Jones, team president, assistant coach, and Dalhousie medical student.
I was instantly drawn to this as an opportunity for some important research.
He's collaborating with the Nova Scotia Health Authority, using the data collected by the helmets to figure out how to coach players more safely.
It doesn't tell us when someone has a concussion, but it does tell us when someone has reached, the 1% of hits, that maybe we should take a look at that player when they come off the field.
The helmets are about $500 each. That's $200 more than the old ones. But the coach says it's worth it, and he's already seen the benefits.
We had a player last game. There was a certain area of his helmet that he tended to block with or to lead with. We were able to coach him up through that week of practice, kind of try to help him steer away from that.
Before, it was up to the players to ask for help.
With the football mentality, it's like soldier on, get through it, finish the game, finish the play, finish the drive, right?
Have you ever taken a hit where you think you shouldn't have continued playing, but you did?
Absolutely.
The new helmets take the decision out of the players' hands and put it into the coaches, who say they have no problem pulling players to keep them safe. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
And we will be right back with the latest from the federal election campaign trail in just a few moments. Stay with us. On the campaign trail today, party leaders faced pointed questions about citizenship, abortion, and Indigenous rights. We begin with Andrew Scheer, who was asked why he had not revealed he also holds U.S. citizenship.
It's not a big deal in Canada for people to have dual citizenship. There are millions.
Scheer tried to downplay the matter, calling it a non-issue. He says he is in the process of renouncing his U.S. citizenship. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau also did some explaining, saying that his views on abortion have evolved. Back in 2011, he was publicly pro-choice, but as a Catholic, he says he personally opposed abortion. He says he is now pro-choice, period. And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh focused his criticism today on the federal government's move to challenge a ruling that calls for compensation for Indigenous children harmed by the on-reserve child welfare system, which could cost Ottawa billions. Singh said an NDP government would not be fighting Indigenous children in court. Once scandal and controversy might have just punctuated politics, now it sometimes seems to dominate it. Evan Dyer chronicles this federal election season of shame, blame, and indignation.
What? The height of hypocrisy. The height of hypocrisy, ladies and gentlemen.
Deception, blame shifting,
pointing fingers at others for doing the same as you. The world has noticed that this election has a lot of it. It began with blackface. Trudeau's response? To give a lecture to his children.
I'm going to have a conversation with them tomorrow morning before they go to school about taking responsibility for mistakes we make. That's what I expect of my kids.
But not, it seems, of himself, since he only owned up after he was caught. Then the man who attacked Trudeau for his thin resume before politics was revealed to have an even thinner one. His claims to have been an insurance broker questioned after it turns out he never got his license.
So you were never actually working as a broker then, it doesn't sound like.
As I said, I received my accreditation under the Canadian Accredited Insurance Broker Program. And in this particular office, the licensed brokers finalized all the transactions.
As the voters absorbed that detail, it emerged that Andrew Scheer was also a U.S. citizen.
No one's ever asked me before about it.
This from a man who once took aim at former Governor Michaël Jean for holding a second passport, and whose party has often tried to score points at the expense of dual citizens.
I'm a Canadian and only a Canadian.
The other parties aren't immune either.
Yeah, I find that Bill 21 is really saddening.
All the federal party leaders say they oppose Quebec's controversial restrictions on religious clothing, but the world has noticed they won't do anything about it. So have NDP supporters.
That to me seems a little hypocritical.
And today, from the party that bills itself as Canada's guardians of inclusion and tolerance, Liberal candidate Jamie Bathe in Nova Scotia managed to insult almost everyone in his Twitter feed, all while celebrating the fun of drunk driving. Just another day in an election where the universal slogan seems to be, do as I say, not as I do. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, opinion polls might be split nationwide with the Liberals and Conservatives in a dead heat, but one province in particular is bucking that trend, Alberta. That's where the Conservatives are way ahead, but a more fringe movement is also gaining support. Kathleen Petty has more on the growing movement for separation.
Look around, we got a lot more than 8 people in the room today.
Wexit, a new effort to tap into a separatist sentiment in Alberta. At this gathering, about 3 dozen showed up.
The Reform Party in the 80s and 90s, their slogan was "The West wants in." Wexit Canada's slogan is "The West wants out."
Reform Party founding leader Preston Manning says ignore this at Canada's peril.
The populist dimension of Western alienation, it can't be ignored, it has to be addressed.
Jason Kenney, former Reform MP and now Premier, has warned often of a unity crisis. This pollster says Kenney does reflect a slow but deep burn.
There's really a sense of frustration here in Alberta, and Albertans are looking for all ways to express it. And I think when people talk about separation, mostly it is just an expression of frustration rather than a clear desire to separate from Canada.
A vehicle for that frustration is a referendum on equalization touted by Kenney.
So I don't actually view the referendum campaign, if you will, as a serious concern about equalization. It's just a convenient way to harness a sense of alienation and rage.
We brought together a few Calgarians to test the temperature.
And until we have a leader that's willing to step up and kind of unite Canadians as a whole, it's going to be tough for us to feel like we're all one country.
I'm not a separatist. I'm a Canadian first and foremost. But, you know, with the continued aspect that we feel powerless here, separation, is that a viable plan B if we can't work this out?
The final result on October 21st might help focus minds here on whether Albertans can work it out. Kathleen Petty, CBC News, Calgary.
And you can watch as all 6 federal party leaders face off in the English language debate on Monday. It's on from 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific time. Watch it on CBC Television, CBC News Network, CBC Gem, or the CBC News app. We'll have full post-debate coverage and highlights right here at our usual time, 6 o'clock. Oh, your food is vegan, maybe your pet food, maybe even your tattoos, but what about your Friday pint? We'll tap into vegan beer next. back to our top story now. With just over 2 weeks to go before the federal election, the Conservative Party has dumped its candidate for Burnaby North Seymour. Our Dan Burrett's back with more on this tonight. So, Dan, why has the party done this?
Mike, the party says recent media reports have brought to light offensive comments made by Heather Leung about LGBTQ people. Leung's opponents say recent opinions expressed by her are homophobic, transphobic, and hateful. Some wanted her booted out before this. Leung has been virtually invisible this campaign. She has turned down numerous interview requests from CBC News and plenty of other media outlets. But it's comments like this that have landed her in a lot of controversy.
More young people are buying into those perverted sexual preferences and gender fluidity.
So, just before 6 o'clock tonight, the Conservative Party sent out this statement in part. Recent media reports have brought to light offensive comments made by Ms. Leung saying homosexuals recruit children and describing the sexual orientation of the LGBTQ community as perverted. There is no tolerance in the Conservative Party for those types of offensive comments. So Heather Leung is out.
All right, so that raises the question, can the Conservatives get another candidate in Burnaby North Seymour in place in time?
Officially, Mike, no, they cannot. The deadline has passed. But here is something interesting. Our CBC colleagues have told us the ballot in Burnaby North Seymour will still say Heather Leung's name and Conservative Party beside it because they've already printed them. The deadline has passed, but she is not recognized by the Conservative Party and cannot use their resources. Mike.
Dan Burrett reporting live tonight. Thanks. While you might assume beer is vegan, that's not always the case. CBC's Tina Lovegreen has the latest in our Growing Vegan series with a look at the inconsistencies surrounding vegan labels.
The beer is flowing and the music playing. It's the usual shenanigans you'd expect at Steel and Oak Brewery, except for one tiny, tiny detail.
So you can see the difference.
You can barely see it, but they've started labeling their beer as vegan friendly.
It is all vegan with the exception of beer that we put honey in.
Isn't all beer vegan?
No. No, it's not.
The main ingredients in beer, the traditional, call it German ingredients, those are 100% vegan. Water, malt, hops, and yeast. It's during the processing. There's fining agents. You can use gelatin or other fining agents made from animal products.
Currently, brewers are not required to spell out the ingredients on their beverages. They only need to write any allergens.
It goes above and beyond the regulatory requirements.
Anna Pippis is a vegan and serves as the director of Plant-Based Policy Center. She applauds the brewers for taking this step, but she thinks it should fall on the government and should span across all vegan products.
We don't have any of those standardized terms when it comes to vegan or plant-based food products. So there's no vegan definition in the Food and Drug Regulation, no plant-based, and these can mean different things. Well, is honey a plant-based friendly ingredient or not? Some people think yes, some people think no. Same thing with processing. So it's not an ingredient in the final product. Does that make the final product vegan friendly or not?
Other alcoholic drinks that are vegan may just not be labeled as such, and the ones that are may use different symbols.
It would be helpful if there was some sort of consistency across terms so that at a glance we can look at a label, understand what it means, and go about our day.
But the Canadian Food Inspection Agency isn't looking to make changes to labeling, so until then, it's on consumers and producers to identify whether the suds they're sipping on qualifies as vegan or not. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, New Westminster.
Well, there's a live shot at 6:37 downtown Vancouver tonight. A mix of rain, sun, everything in between. So Brett breaks it down. What's the chance of a rainbow this weekend? We'll have your 7-color forecast coming up. is back. The weekend is here. Yay. A little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. It's going to be one of those ones where I couldn't confidently tell you exactly, say, when or where the rain's going to fall, but it will be somewhere across the Lower Mainland.
Oh, good.
Got a bit of money on Abbotsford if you're out there on Saturday, just something to keep in mind. Have you noticed how it's also really dark out right now?
Yes, I did notice that.
Yeah. How times are changing. We motor right along through the year. Let's take a look this morning at what it looked like as we started our last day of the work week. Happy Friday to everyone. Congratulations. You've made it. And yes, you got a nice shower like that as well. It did carry on through the morning hours across much of the metro region, clearing up quite nicely in terms of rain. It was definitely cloudy and on the cool side as well. As we go ahead into the overnight period, we are expecting that trend to continue of a few spotty showers here and there. By tomorrow morning, really, as I said, if I had to pick anywhere that would have a bit of shower activity, I'd put that toward the Fraser Valley. I think much of the downtown and sort of western edge, shall we say, of Vancouver, I think that should be mostly all right. In terms of the afternoon, though, it's looking great. Lots of sunshine should be coming out. A few clouds here and there, but in general, I think it's going to be a pretty nice Saturday afternoon. And the overnight period as well is looking not too bad. It really is going to be on Sunday where things start to take a bit of a change. We're going to be watching for some moisture coming on shore. This is going to be more so Sunday afternoon, starting really for the Sunshine Coast and northern portions of Vancouver Island. Sea to sky as well would definitely be into this. This is around 5 or 6 o'clock. But as you're winding down from the weekend, that's when I'd expect some of the more significant rain to be coming through. And at this point in time, we could be dealing with potentially over 40 millimeters of rain. I do think that's a little bit on the high side, probably more comfortably in about 15 to 30. Now that said, the temperatures are going to be fairly close to seasonal, so nothing too extreme on one end or another. And what does that translate to for your 5-day forecast? Well, I think you're going to like what you're going to see at least. Some sunshine here, just that slight risk for showers on Saturday morning. Sunday, more cloud than anything else. And then to start off next week, that's going to be some heavy rain, but there's some relief in sight afterwards.
All right, Brett, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Well, when you look for art around BC, you can come across unexpected characters and stories. That's what at the heart of the 5-part documentary series, Art is a Story. Tonight, filmmaker Stuart Gillies and art collector Paul Crawford head to North Vancouver. There they meet a direct descendant of Joseph Baker, with whom Mount Baker is named after.
Paul Crawford, the sun is shining in Vancouver. Who would have thunk it?
It's a Christmas miracle in February.
Why are we heading over to the North Shore?
We're heading over today to meet Wade Baker and his wife, Mary.
Okay, and so what's so special about these two lovely folk?
Well, Wade Baker is an artist. He's an Indigenous carver. That itself is very fascinating. But him and his wife are also historians, and they wrote a book documenting their family history, which relates back to Joseph Baker. Joseph Baker was the cartographer on Vancouver's ship, the guy who actually drew the maps of the whole Pacific Northwest.
Wait a minute, there's a mountain just over there called Mount Baker.
Mount Baker, the very one, named after his relative, Joseph Baker.
A lot of times when I'm doing something, it seems to just fall in place. It's like this unseen force guiding you into something that you want to learn more about. They ask me who taught me, and I said, it's just in my blood. The wood, there's several stories in the wood and which way the grain's going, how old is it, and then the stories that were behind it, and then that's another huge amount.
I know you work in your art, so there's many stories integrated into your work. How did the book come about?
Wade had since a child heard that they were descended from this 3rd Lieutenant Joseph Baker. And when I started asking around, no one had heard anything about him. There was one piece of his surveying equipment in the Vancouver Maritime Museum, but that was it. And we happened to be in Maui, and I went into a vintage map store and said, have you ever heard of Lieutenant Joseph Baker? Because we knew that Captain Vancouver had been in Hawaii. And she said, oh yes, I have his original lithographs right here. They made such high-level friendships and relationships with the First Nations people they were meeting that they would pick up 2 master navigators everywhere they went. So that's another reason the maps were so detailed. So that's where it started, 2008, and it just went from there.
It feels like, Paul, every corner we turn there is this new interesting person or history, or has it just been part of your lives, these kinds of stories?
I'm growing up with oral traditionals all my life. With my mother as the Grand Chief of the Kwagate Nation, my dad's Salish from this area here. We would hear all these great legends and stories.
Do you find that in the youth today there's still that desire to learn those stories?
Today, it's actually been more thought after. The kindergartens are now learning the Squamish language right away. And when I started, we weren't allowed to speak their language.
Yeah, it's really a renaissance in terms of the arts and culture in the schools. There's far more respect for looking at many subjects through an Indigenous way of knowing, which is really positive.
As we left Wade's studio, he pointed us in the direction of one of his many pieces around the province. The Gateway to Ancient Wisdom, a contemporary stainless steel and red cedar sculpture that represents the concept of entering traditional territory. It is so important as a newcomer to this country that I pay homage and respect to those who came before me. Acknowledging and respecting a carefully placed foot behind guides us to understand a carefully placed foot in front of us. So far in this series has been somewhat of an emotional roller coaster for me. There is so much growing connection to the artists and the stories Paul is introducing me to.
It is a complex divorce made all the more murkier by maneuvers, spin, and procedures. We break down the Brexit debate and next steps coming up. To politics south of the border now, where the screws of the impeachment inquiry are turning on Donald Trump. Tonight, subpoenas have gone to Trump and to Vice President Mike Pence. They're demanding documents on that phone call with Ukraine's president, and Trump has been quick to respond. Lindsay Duncombe takes a look.
With increasing evidence, including his own admissions that Donald Trump did exactly what he is accused of, Trump today insisted his motivations are pure.
We're not looking at politics, we're looking at corruption.
That sounds rich to the man Trump has accused of being corrupt with zero proof.
All this talk of the president about corruption comes from the most corrupt president we've had in modern history. He's the definition of corruption.
Newly released text messages suggest the White House wanted to make a presidential visit and military aid contingent on the Ukrainians investigating Joe Biden and the 2016 U.S. election. At one point, the top American diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, asks, are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? The response from the American ambassador to the EU, a Trump donor with no previous diplomatic experience, call me. This as the investigation intensifies. Democrats tonight officially sending a subpoena to the White House and signaling they want documents from Vice President Mike Pence, too. The Inspector General who investigated the whistleblower's complaint and deemed it credible spent hours on Capitol Hill answering questions in a closed hearing. Even some Republicans are criticizing Trump.
I think it's terrible. It's something that I wouldn't have done.
Utah Senator Mitt Romney called the president's actions wrong and appalling.
The reality is you can count the number of Republicans openly criticizing the president on one hand. Most are silent. Whatever happens in the coming days and weeks will determine if they stay that way. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Washington.
To the UK now, where there are just weeks remaining before the looming deadline for Britain's exit for the EU. So now the CBC's Margaret Evans brings us this explainer to help look past the confusion at where things stand in the long drawn-out and complicated process that we simply call Brexit.
It's hard to believe, but with just 1 month to go until that Halloween deadline, Britain is still walking inexorably towards the unknown. Remember Theresa May, the last British Prime Minister, and her mantra?
Brexit means Brexit.
Well, she was replaced by Boris Johnson and his mantra.
Let's get Brexit done. Let's get Brexit done.
Get Brexit done.
He hasn't made much progress, but he's certainly made a splash. He's lost a disappointed brother from his cabinet, his majority in Parliament, and a whole slew of votes. He's purged his Conservative Party of some of its most distinguished members and been accused of lying to the Queen after the Supreme Court judged his decision to suspend Parliament illegal. All in aid of getting Brexit done. One more thing. The opposition has boxed him in. They've introduced legislation that will compel Johnson to ask for a Brexit delay if he can't reach a deal with the European Union.
I'd rather be dead in a ditch.
Johnson's critics suspect he still may try to defy Parliament with the help of this man. Rasputin, Moriarty, take your villainous pick if you're a Remainer. Dominic Cummings is widely seen as the man behind Johnson's take no prisoners strategy, a hero to those who believe delivering Brexit is the people's will. But he's also accused of just plain stirring the pot.
We're enjoying this. We're going to win. We're going to leave.
Right now, it doesn't feel much like anyone's winning. The mood toxic, and much of it being laid at the Prime Minister's feet, aiming wartime words like surrender and collaboration at the opposition.
It is Jeremy Corbyn's surrender bill. That's what it is. It means running up the white flag. The bill's shameful.
Enter the Incredible Hulk. Johnson has compared Britain's efforts to break free from Brussels to the big green one, saying the Hulk always manages to escape his shackles. Maybe not the best negotiating tactic, but certainly one for the headlines as October 31st approaches. Trick or treat. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
It is a controversial and some say sympathetic portrayal of a Marvel madman. But is Joker actually a good movie? Eli has his review next. Okay, it is the latest comic book thriller to hit theaters, and while many superheroes trade jokes and punches, Joker makes absolutely no attempt to soften the violence with any humor. Joaquin Phoenix shows us what full frontal alienation looks like.
And while this film has certainly been controversial, you may be wondering, is it any good? Well, Eli Glasner has his review.
You can call me Joker.
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? Blah, blah, blah. All of that chit-chat's gonna get you hurt.
There have been many Jokers, but never one like this. Joaquin Phoenix stars as Arthur Fleck, a sad, lonely man with his share of struggles. He lives with his mother in a rundown apartment, works as a clown, and has a condition that forces him to laugh uncontrollably. No joy in that sound. Arthur struggles with that and with mental illness, while his mother tries to keep him positive.
My mother always tells me to smile and put on a happy face.
But it's hard to smile when you can't even get laughs as a clown. The one escape Arthur enjoys is the nightly Murray Franklin show. Robert De Niro stars as something like the Johnny Carson of Gotham City. One night, Arthur, who's an aspiring comedian, gets featured, but not the way he intended.
Well, no one's laughing now.
You can say that again, pal.
After that, Arthur snaps, and what begins as an act of self-defense gives the city a deranged new champion.
For my whole life, I didn't know if I even really existed. But I do. And people are starting to notice.
Now, go back to the comic books or Tim Burton's Batman, and it was a vat of acid that made the comedian become the Joker. In this film, the toxic brew Arthur falls into is a cold, uncaring society that only looks up when he raises a gun. That's how monsters are born. Now, to be clear, this is not a good film. It's somewhat superficial, it's heavy-handed, it hammers the same tragic point again and again. But in the middle of this muddle is a remarkable performance by Joaquin Phoenix. There's a moment when he crystallizes into the character. We see it coming, but it arrives with this monstrous sort of grace.
Send in the clowns.
Phoenix doing this demonic dance, intoxicated by his own power. And then there he is, the one we were waiting for, blood on his face, the crowd bellowing for more. Disturbing? Yeah. It's also incredibly potent. 3.5 stars out of 5. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
Disturbing and very dark.
Yeah, potent would certainly be a good way to describe that.
Yeah, and we always, while Eli's review is on, we always try to guess what he's going to rate it at.
Yeah,
and
it's a fun little game.
3.5. I thought he was going to go lower, but
yeah. I like the way that he was describing that, very poetically phrased. I give him a lot of credit for it, but we'll see if I can check it out.
In theaters now.
Yes.
Just a reminder, this newscast is always online, cbc.ca/BC. Dan is back at 11 right after the National. Have a fantastic weekend.
Good night.
See you Monday.